Let me show you how I make cutting boards like this. I need to make 3 cutting boards for clients, so I want to show you how I make cutting boards. It's really easy. You can change it up a lot just by using different species of woods. I happen to like the way these look, and so do a lot of my customers because I've sold a lot over the years. So let me show you how.
I have a few scrap bins that I just throw scraps in as I'm doing projects, and those become blanks for cutting boards later. This is what that pile's from. I've come up with a length that I like doing for most of my cutting boards, and I end up right at about 18 inches. So most of these scrap pieces, if they meet the 18.5 to 19 inch threshold, I'll go ahead and cut them at that, and that way they're all cut to length and ready for the next step. I often start at the joiner. That's just where I like to establish my first flat side. Then I can usually turn it 90 degrees and reference that flat side up against the fence to get a truly square piece. From there, I might go over to the table saw and cut the other side square, or go ahead and start ripping strips that I know are square. What you just saw me do is how I check to know if I'm going to get a good joint or not. I lay the boards out on a known flat surface like this cast iron top, and I use light finger pressure to just press the boards together. If all of the gap is removed with light pressure, then for sure it's going to be good when you clamp it up. And since I had multiple cutting boards that I was making that day, I just went ahead and sped through this process, not showing every little detail.
For the pieces that were too wide, after I have jointed one face and then one edge, I can actually just set my table saw fence to the thickness I want my boards to be and rip strips and then flip them 90 degrees. So let me grab one of the pieces that I know is the thickness I want these boards. So this is how thick I want them to be rough. So I'm going to flip it on its side and use this as my spacer. A little too tight. There we go. So now I can rip all of these boards to that same width, and they will be the same thickness for the cutting board that I need. If you're getting a lot of burning on your boards like this, your table saw blade is either dull or very dirty. Mine might be both, but this is white oak, and white oak tends to burn pretty easily just with friction of the blade. So at this stage, I'm not going to worry with it that much because after we glue it up, we're still going to have to flatten this, but I just wanted you to be aware that this is probably just a dirty blade. Now, even after glue up, I'm going to have to flatten these, but I don't want to have to do that much flattening work. So some of these that are really tall like this, I'm going to bring them down closer to this level now that I have my table saw fence set to that same amount. I'm just going to take this, these tall ones, and rip them through there, and that way they'll all be very close to this thickness. I just cut out this piece, and this offcut, I would really want to use what I can from it. So if it's wide enough, what you can do is turn it and then run it back through the other way to see if it will actually hit where your thickness measurement is. This one, it will. So I can actually get another piece by turning this one 90 degrees and running it back through. Then when I'm done, I'll flip it up and it'll be equal with this one here.
I took a little bit of time and trimmed the rest of these down to where they're all the same height. It'll just save time when I'm flattening later. Then, because of the type of cutting board that I do, where it has feet, I can choose a top side that has the better looking stuff, and some of the stuff that might have a small blemish or something, I use my discretion, but it can go on the underside. Like I mentioned before, some of these are offcuts from other projects, so they're not always square or parallel. Some of them are wedge shaped. So I take them through the planer a few times and get the two faces parallel. That way I can put them together and they will clamp up and be a parallel cutting board. This is another example of one of those wider boards that I will need to rip multiple strips out of. However, there's a blemish, a big crack, right down part of the middle of it. So I'll be able to get one strip for the cutting board out of that one side, but I need to cut from the other side to get a couple of other strips to avoid that crack. The way to do that is to move your fence to where you're barely taking off any material from the outside of that board. You're referencing that flat edge against the fence, and you're creating another flat and parallel edge on the outside of the board. That way you're able to rip from either edge and be able to avoid that big crack that you saw earlier. For some of these really thin strips, I did not want to run those through the planer and have them grab or chip out, so I just used my drum sander and sent them through about 1,000,000 times to flatten them. It's at this point that I usually spend a little bit of time with each of the set of cutting board pieces and just rearrange them, move them around, swap sides until I am happiest with the way that they're laid out. Then I set them to the side and move on to the next one. That way when I go to glue up, I know this is precisely how I want it to look. And here they are, all laid out in the order I want them.
I put what's going to be the show face up, and here are all of the boards. I actually had enough for 2 extra with all that I milled up. I really only need 3 right now, but this gives me some options. I think they look good.
I like to double check at this point and make sure they are as wide as I need them to be. I don't need them any wider than 12 inches because when I ship these, they won't fit in the boxes that I have.
It is time to glue these boards together. A few things to note. You do not want to skimp on the glue. Titebond 2 is plenty good. It does not have to be a waterproof glue because hopefully someone's not sending these through the dishwasher. But Titebond 2 is even rated on their website for, you know, it's water resistant. So I use that sometimes. Sometimes I use Titebond 3. Do your glue research, figure out which one works for you. You want very even clamping pressure and pretty consistent squeeze out everywhere, like in every seam. Sometimes I lay down some painter's tape on my clamps and that will help keep all the glue off of the clamps. But when you have so many pieces like this, I like to just use wax paper. I lay it down on the clamps and it seems to work really well. When you're done, you just peel it off and throw it away. Let's get them glued up. I got this years ago and it has been great for saving my surface from getting a bunch of glue on it. All it is one of those bank signs or signs that you see from like a little league team or something that they put up on the corner. When they're done with them, they discard them because it's usually for a specific event. They're vinyl, so you can roll them out. The glue won't stick to them. It comes right off. Roll it out, protect your workbench, and move right on with your life. So there's a little tip for you. You obviously, if you're doing one cutting board, you don't need clamps this big. I'm gonna do 3 at once because I have these big clamps. But if you're just doing one, obviously use smaller clamps. Wax paper. And then I just rip this in half with some scissors so that I don't waste as much. This keeps a lot of the glue off of my clamps. I didn't do this at first, and you get some of them that just really have a lot of buildup. It affects the use of them. I ended up changing my mind and only doing 2 of these because there are so many strips in these. By the time you lay them sideways to get glue on them, they're really wide. So this is only 2 boards worth. I'm going to start gluing them up.
I like to use just a cheap silicone spatula that is wide and made for cake baking or spreading or something in the kitchen like that. I find that I can be much faster with this than some of the smaller ones, and these are very inexpensive, so throw a couple of them in your shop.
Just turn them over and squeeze them together. You gotta kind of hurry because you don't want all your glue to drip down. You want it to stay where it is. Sometimes I'll even kind of take them and push them together like that. It'll suction to the next one and it helps them stay together. So in between the two boards, obviously there's no glue, and that way they'll come apart into two cutting boards. And using the scraps does make for more work because there's more glue surface to do and that kind of thing. So again, using scraps can be expensive because it takes more time, takes more glue. But I think they look cool and I like using up scraps when I'm able to. And what I do is just tear off the excess wax paper so it won't hold up my clamps. You want to watch and make sure that none of them are popping up. Sometimes they'll kind of squeeze out and boards will pop up. So you want just nice, see there they go popping up. You can, before you tighten them all the way down, you can push them back down. And that way you won't have as much flattening to do later. But you see how there's a nice even line on all of these. These are popping up. So before I go any farther, I want to get a clamp on the center to make sure to get even clamping pressure. Should have already had it over there. There we go. Nothing's popping up, so it's looking pretty good. There, I finally see some glue right there. I was worried about that one. I can crank down on all of them a little bit more, making sure that nothing's popping up. Oh, those did kind of pop up. There we go. Sit down there, board. Yeah, that's looking good. Then I'll usually put a couple more clamps kind of in between, just barely long enough. And I want to show you something that I do. Some other people try to remove all of the glue, and I just don't see the need in that. We're still going to have to flatten these because they're not all perfect. So what I do is just try to not have any lumps or bumps or anything. I basically just smooth out the glue so that as I'm flattening, I don't have it kind of sitting funny on little glue pieces. So I just take this and I'll just kind of smear out the glue to where it's even. And it seems to work really well. I'm just removing all the blobs basically. I'm going to do the other side also, as much as I can. This also ends up helping it dry faster because if you have big glue blobs, they sit there wet for a long time. Then the wax paper just comes right off and protects your clamps. figure out, do a little bit of scraping where the clamps were underneath. Now that one will sit fine to flatten. Again, this is not really to remove all of the glue, but it is to make sure that it can sit flat when I take it over there to flatten it. Just some of the lumps that I didn't get, like that one's gonna hold us off right there because it's sticking up. So I'll scrape it. There we go. Now it's time to flatten these cutting boards. I'm actually going to use my Onefinity CNC here. It does a great job to secure it, flatten it down, and then I'll probably take it to my planer. If you don't have a CNC or a large planer, there are other ways to do it. I'll leave a link below to a video that I've used in the past with a different method.
For most of my flattening, I use this 1-inch carbide flattening bit in the CNC router that I have. It does a great job and establishes a truly flat side, and that way I can take it to the planer and get the other side flat and parallel just like the first one. In the CNC I'm running is a Onefinity CNC Journeyman.
I've come over to my table saw, which is a known very flat surface, this cast iron wing here. And when I put it down, it actually is flat enough that it creates a little suction. You see that? It's hard to discern maybe on camera, but when I put it down, it's flat enough that it creates a little surface tension suction and makes it hard to pick back up. And that's exactly what you're looking for. So now that that is flat enough, we can take that over to the planer and get this other side parallel with it, and it'll be perfect.
Up to this point, I have left the edges a little long and they're jagged. They're not precise, and that's fine because I just take them to the table saw. I use a crosscut sled, or in this case, I was using a miter gauge, and just crosscut those edges to be the length that I needed. I usually sand my pieces with 80 grit just to get rid of milling marks and lines and different things like that before moving on to filling blemishes with CA glue. That's what I typically use to fill cracks and blemishes that just appeared in this whole process that you wouldn't be able to sand out. I happen to like this Starbond black CA glue, and I've got an affiliate link for them below. As you can see, even in cherry, it does a nice job filling in these knots and gaps and making them look pretty natural. A lot of my customers want custom laser engraving on their cutting boards, and I offer that. I have a 150 watt CO2 laser that I use to do that, and here I'm just laying out the center of each of these boards. That happens to be the way that I like to lay out a lot of my designs. You have to admit, it is pretty satisfying to watch these designs come to life on a blank cutting board like this. The sander I use is a Random Orbit sander, and it's their electric version from Surf Prep Sanding. They're an affiliate of mine also, and if you're looking for a nice upgraded sander that won't vibrate the mess out of your hand, I recommend this one for your shop. Most of the time I stick with a small roundover for the edge treatment on a lot of my cutting boards. Occasionally I'll do a chamfer, but most of the time I use roundover.
Now that I have sanded the boards up to 120, I am going to use a squirt bottle just with water and squirt these things down. I'll towel off the excess just so they'll dry a little bit quicker, and then set them in front of a fan and let them dry. What this does is actually raises the fibers on the board, and then I will sand them one more time to 180 or 220, something like that, and then they will feel really nice and smooth. If you don't do this, the first time somebody wipes the boards down, gets them wet just a little bit or whatever, they're gonna feel real fuzzy and kind of rough. So you definitely don't want to skip this step.
For me, the final sanding step is 220. I find that that gives a great result, and I don't have to go any higher than that to have a nice feeling board for many years. All that's left is to blow out the dust and oil these boards. This is yet another affiliate of mine. I know I'm not trying to plug all of these too much. They just happen to all be things that I use very often, and they're all in this one video. So I'll leave links below to all of this stuff. If you want to go check out any of these tools or materials that I'm using, use my link. It will save you some money, and I'll get a little kickback. This Atomic Finishes does a great job with their wood oil for cutting boards. It is quite water resistant once it is set in there and cured. I like to apply it with just a white Scotch-Brite pad. I just cut a little strip so I don't use a whole pad for it because I don't find it that difficult to just circular motion rub this stuff into the board. I let it sit for 15-20 minutes before I wipe off the excess and then let it dry overnight.
I tend to make a lot of these cutting boards, and I have found a style of feet for the cutting boards that I really like, so I tend to buy them in bulk. Just have these little containers, and when they come in, they're all individually packaged, like they're packaged for sale, but I break them out into the parts so I can just grab them and go. They are these white, I think the brand is Everbuilt, so it's a Home Depot brand, but they're really strong, sturdy, they're non-slip. I like the white ones, and they come with stainless steel screws. So I came up with this little jig not too long ago. It's just got a couple of boards here that hit the end of the cutting board, and I know exactly where I need to drill, and then it's equal on all four sides. Very simple. I know it was a lot of steps to get there, but the steps are not very difficult. And if you don't have all the equipment I do, you can do those same methods with other equipment. You can do different styles. The principles are all the same. I hope that gave you some information and really made you want to tackle a project like this. It's simple, but it's fun. Go use some scraps, give them away as gifts, sell them, make some money. I think you'll enjoy it. Bye.